Welcome back to the Future Nerd, and today we are going to create our first .NET 6 REST API. And in our REST API, the requirement is just a user should be able to create, update, and delete a project. Okay, let's open the Visual Studio and create a project for our first project. I would create a new project, and we have to search for web API. And here you can see that we are using this because we are using C# language, so we would create ASP.NET Core Web API for C# language. Create next, and here we would name our first API that first or just API. I would create it here and press next button. Then we will be using .NET 6 framework, and there would be no authentication for yet, and there would be HTTPS enabled, and I would not use Docker, and then use controllers, enable Open API support. You have to make sure these checkboxes are checked, and enable Docker is disabled. Then create your project and done. You are done your first .NET 6 project API. Let's run this. And you would be able to see that there would be an API available for us, and if I request this endpoint, I would get some data from our API. Let's discuss the architecture of our API first. Let me stop this project, and then let's delete extra thing that we don't want to create for now. And I would not use this service weather forecast. And then you can see that we have controllers folder and program file. In our program file, we have all the services and configuration that we would be implementing in our API. On the very first line, we have a web application builder, and we are adding controllers are the entry point for our API, and these are the endpoints that our API exposed. And this is the Swagger configuration. For this, you would be able to see the endpoints in our UI whenever we run this, and we can request our API by using this Swagger configuration. And there is a HTTPS redirection. What this would do, it would run our API on HTTPS instead of HTTP. Whenever user would be requesting our HTTP request, it would redirect that HTTP request to HTTPS. And then we have authorization. We would not use this for now. And then map controllers, what it does, it just provides the endpoints for our API, and whatever the action methods we have defined in our controller, that would be the endpoint of our API. And then we are running our app. So the main concern for us here is the controllers, and these are the controllers that we have in our controllers folder. We have just one controller, and if you see that, what we are going to do, we are going to create, update, or delete a project. So we would need an endpoint for to create, update and delete. So we would use a project controller, and then project controller I would refactor this, but I would refactor this class name project controller, and I would remove this for now, and I would not be using logger as well, so I would remove this as well. And we would use iActionResult. iActionResult is just an interface that provides different type of data that can be returned from that method. So defines a contract that represents the result of an action method. So it can return JSON file, it can return the HTML file, it can return the statuses of our API like OK, not found. These are all available in iActionResult. So I would use this get project, and I would remove this, and I would return OK for now. Return OK. So you can see that it would return OK result, that there is no error in our API request. So for now we are going to use this OK method, and now we would create the project in our database. But in by using database we have to create this, so I would use the SQL Server connection string, and we can copy this from here. This is the connection string of our server. I would put it in app settings, and in app setting I would create a connection strings, and then I would use a name for the variable SQL server, and then I would assign the value. So this would be our data source, our SQL server, and the database that we want to create is project database, and that's it. And now we will use this SQL server connection string in our code to create update database. So let's go there, and because we are using code first approach, and we will use EF core entity framework core, that would be our ORM. ORM means object relation manager. It would create, update, and it would perform all the operations on the database that we want, and we have to use these packages to install. And let's install it. These packages you can install by package manager, or you can go to the NuGet manager and you can search here and install them one by one. But I would use command, so I will install package this, and this will be installed one by one. Okay, now we have installed all the packages, and we would create our database. So let's create a folder in our project, and I would name it data, and then I will create a class for our database that would be project context, and we have to inherit it from the DB context that we have installed, and I will import this. So all the tables that we want to create here in our database, we have to create a DB set for that. Prop, sorry, that would be DB set, and it would be a project, and the name would be projects. And you can see that we have an error here, so we have to create a class for that project. So I will create another folder in the data folder. It would contains all the classes for our tables. I will create a new folder, add folder, and that would be models, and I will create a project class here, project, and in our project we have project id, int that would be id, and then a string column that would be name of the project, and then a boolean property. It will be the status of the project, whether it is completed or not. So for now we are using these columns in our database. So we have used this project in our context file, and we have to import these models, project, sorry, I have just misspelled projects, and then we have to import this class, and in our program file we have to define what would be the database file, builder.services.add db context, and that would be a project context file, project context class, and we import this, and then it would not be like this, it would be like this, and then we will use the options, and in options we will define the connection string of our database, use SQL server, if you don't have SQL server you can use in-memory database, use in-memory database, and we have to provide a connection string here, so we will that we have defined in our app settings, variable connection string that would be builder dot configurations. The configurations would return all the app settings that we have defined in our app setting file. So we have to define the section for to get this. we would get connection string, and the name of the connection string is SQL server. As you can see that we have defined connection strings, and the name of the connection string is SQL server. So it would return us the connection string, and we would pass this to the configuration, and I am not using in-memory database, so let's do this. And now you have to create a migration that would track every change of our database, and then we have to use command init. First of all, I have to define where it is. Yes, first of all, I have to use constructor CTOR, and then we have to define public CTOR, and because we are using the configurations from here, it would pass these configuration options to constructor of this class. So this is db context options, db context option builder. So we have to create a constructor for this. That would be db context option builder, and this would be options, and we have to pass this to the base class, base constructor options option. So would be option, sorry, what is this? Option is not null, or cannot convert from db builder to db context options. So I would change this to db context options, and then we have to create a migration init add migration. That would be init. You can name it any way that you want to. First migration or the initial migration, I would use init. So let's do this, and now you can see that it has created a migration folder, and it has created a first migration at that date time, and it every time you would change anything in a database, you have to create a migration for this, so that you know the history of the database, when it was changed and what was added. If you want to create database again, so you would use these migrations to create your database again. Okay, we have created a database, and now you would be see that if I open this and if I refresh the databases, okay, it has added the migration, so I have to update the database, update dash database, to reflect the changes in our database. So now if I refresh this, now you can see that we have a project database in our server, and I can see the table I have defined, the project. It has the columns ID, name, status. So now we would use this table to create a project in our database, update a project or delete a project. Okay, let's start, and go to the controllers. In controllers, I would inject the database in constructor private read only, and that would be project context. I would name this context with the underscore because this is a private variable. Okay, use this class, and I would add this to constructor. And now you would see that if I use context dot projects and I want to get all, so I would use to list, and it would return me the projects in our database, and I would return this in our OK result. Now you have created the first endpoint of your .NET 6 REST API. It would return all the projects in our database, and let's run this. Now you can see that it has one endpoint get. It would returns all the projects in our database, but now we don't have any project in our database, so it returns us nothing. So let's add a project in our database. I would insert REST API, and this would be 0, and I would save this. Cannot insert null value into column name table. Okay, I would delete this and save this. And now if I run our API, we will get the records in our database for the projects. Name is REST API, status is false. Now let's create update and delete routes as well. Don't save this. Get project, and now we have to define method for update. For update we would use put verb, http verbs, that would be put, and the name would be update project, and it would have id int id, and then a view model that we want to update. I would create a folder here again. Let's stop this and create a new folder for our view models. And I will create a class here, project VM, and it would have id, name, and then prop full, and that would be status, but I would not use this here. Public class create project VM. I would write it here because for creating a project we don't want to get an ID from the user, so I will create another view model for this, and I will inherit this from create view model, and for update and create we will use project VM, and to create for update and get we will use project VM, and to create the project in our database we will use create project VM. So let's start, and you can write required keyword, required annotations, like any validations that you want to put here, like string range. The name length would be something from start from 2 to 10 or something like that. String length, you can define minimum and maximum length as well, but I would not use this. So let's use these classes in our endpoints, and we would project VM VM, and I would import this. For creating or updating we have to use underscore context dot projects dot update. We have to update this, so we have to call the update method, but update method requires entity of project. We have project VM, so we have to map this on our database model. First of all, we would get this from the context dot projects dot first or default, and the ID would be x dot id dot equals, it should be equal to ID passed in our route. So we would get this from the database model equal to this, and we have to update model. If model equal to null, then we have to return not found response. ID, so ID is the project against this ID is not found in our database. So if model is not null, we have to update the values. Model dot name equal to VM dot name, and then model dot status equal to VM dot status. Then we have to update this in our database. We would call this, and at the end we have to save the changes we have made in our database. Context dot save changes, I would use async, and we have used await, that would be async, and that would be a task. By using async operations we have to use task. So the model updated with this ID, we have to return the ID that has updated in our database. So that's it. We have created another endpoint to update the project in database. Now we would create another endpoint to create the project in our database. We would use the name this create, and that would be create project. The request HTTP verb for this would be post, and we don't want to get this. Project VM, we would use create project VM, because in project VM we have ID property. We don't know what would be the ID on the creation time, because it is auto increment, so we will not get the ID from the user. So we will use this class to create the project in our database. So for creating a, we have to create a new project model. That would be model and new project, that is a database entity. I have to import this, and then we will assign the values that we received from the user. Model dot name equal to vm dot name, and then the status. And for adding a new record in database, we will use add method. It would add, and finally the save changes, and we will return, what is there, we will return the ID that is assigned to the project after creation. In our database we will return the ID of the model ID. So that's it. Let's run this and check what is going on. Okay, we have now 3 endpoints in our API. First is to get the projects from the database, update the project, and create a project. To create a project, we will pass web project. The status is false, it's not complete yet, so we will execute this. So it has returned us 4. The ID created for this object is 4. Now let's get this from the database to check if it is created. Now you can see that the ID 4 has the name project and its status is false. Now let's update its status and name as well. Now I have to define the ID. ID is 4 that we are going to update, and then the model values in it, ID, name, and then the status. I have copied this, but why it is not copied? Let's copy again and paste it here, and its status is true, it's completed. Now let's run this and check if it is updated. The VM field is required. I have passed the name, ID, and status. Let's debug this, what is happening on update. Let's run this. ID, name, status is true. What is true is not valid. TRUE, true. Let's run this, and now you would see that it's updated, and the value, the ID of that item that we have updated is 4. And now let's check the values in our database. Let's run this to get the projects, and now you can see that for web projects the status is updated. And that's it. Happy learning, and in the next lecture we are going to learn about Efcore Fluent API. It would be a great addition to our database entity configurations, and let's see this in the next session. Bye bye.